Hello everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today, especially following those really good talks. As already introduced, my name is Markus. I'm the founder and CEO of MontBlancAI. And I will be talking today about generative AI for membrane filtration equipment and beyond. And that's probably like a little bit of an outlier talk here, right? I'm not going to go into like the deep technical details of membranes. I'm really going to talk about AI and give you a little bit of an overview of what it could mean for that industry. And for the people who were here on yesterday, actually in the morning, Steve Beckman really gave me kind of the perfect segue for my talk today. So before I'm going to start and jump into the slide deck, let me ask you, it's probably a stupid question, but who has heard of ChatGPT, right? I hope everybody's raising their hands now. Perfect. Who used it at least once? Okay, still everybody. Who is using it once per month? Okay, getting less. Do we get to like once per week? Once per day? Once per hour? Who is using it right now to Google what generative AI is? All right? Yes. So it's quite impressive, right? ChatGPT has really become such a common term and so commonly used in such a short time. So in fact, if you look at the statistics and you compare it to, like, let's say Spotify and Instagram, Spotify took around half a year to get 1 million users. Instagram was twice as fast. And ChatGPT got to 1 million users in 5 days. That's really impressive. And I looked it up. Today, there are around 100 million users that use ChatGPT. And they account to 1.8 billion visitors per month. 1.8 billion. That's a really huge number, right? So actually, let me take a step back here and define a little bit what generative AI is. It falls under the umbrella of narrow AI with limited memory. Well, that might not mean anything to you, and that's fine. Because the name, as it really suggests, it generates content, right? It's generative AI. So it generates content like text, images, music, voice, videos, and much more. But more importantly, what I also want to make sure, it's not only ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT kind of has become the household name for it, just like Kleenex, Band-Aid, or Velcro brand names that actually describe the product. So throughout the presentation, I will actually kind of alternate a little bit between ChatGPT and generative AI. The other point that I want to make here, and that's really important to me, is there are kind of a lot of doomsday scenarios out there where AI is replacing human, it takes over the world, and also have the scientific movies becoming suddenly real. But the way I look at AI is really not the case. I think AI will empower humans to do more. And let me give you a little bit of an analogy here. If you consider the relationship between a gardener and his tools, right? The invention of tools like a shovel didn't actually replace the gardener. In fact, it made her or his work more efficiently, allowing the gardener to achieve results that would be impossible with just bare hands. And I think AI is very similar to this. It's a tool. It's a tool that can handle large amounts of data, make complex calculations, automate repetitive tasks, and even learn from experience. But just as a shovel cannot really decide where to dig, AI relies on human guidance. So humans set the goals, they provide the data, they interpret the results, and they make the final decisions. So AI might change the nature of some jobs. That's for sure. That's really hard to avoid. But just as the shovel changed the nature of gardening, it's the same way. But it doesn't really replace the need for human judgment, creativity, understanding, and empathy. And it's becoming much more important in the future. So ultimately, like a gardening tool, AI is opening up new possibilities for innovation and growth. And we all knew what came after the shovel, right? We have like tractors and other sort of big machinery coming along the way. My last point I want to make on this slide is that AI is going to be here to stay. AI is not a new idea. It actually started in the 1960s. There was a lot of work done, and then it kind of had like this, what's called the AI winter, where a lot of the research stopped on AI. And that was sort of in the mid-1970s or so. And now we are kind of in a new wave of AI that's kind of started like 5, 10, 15 years ago. And a lot of things have changed since the 1960s. We have huge amounts of data available. There's huge amounts of computational resources available. We have cloud providers, Microsoft, AWS, Google, have huge computational centers with GPUs. If you have not seen one of those, that's very impressive. Then also big advantages in machine learning, which is really kind of the math behind all of this. There's been new ways to train those really large models much more efficiently. And then on the other side, also global investment. Governments, the public center, universities, the private sector, everybody's kind of investing a lot of money into AI and really sort of propelling that technology advancement. So I think those drivers are generally, they're pretty robust and diverse. So that's kind of the reason why I think AI this time around, it's really going to be here to stay. So let me jump a little bit into that slide here. And that's really a study done by IoT Analytics. And they publish a report like this every quarter, where they basically ask the CEOs, well, what are they kind of talking about? You see on the horizontal axis here, the importance of the keywords. On the vertical axis, you see the relative change to the quarter before. So in this case, it's the change from Q1 this year to the quarter last year. On the bottom right, what you basically have is kind of all the economic uncertainties topics. So there's inflation, recession, shortages, uncertainties, supply chain issues. They're still extremely important. Almost everybody talks about this, but they're kind of, at least not gaining in importance compared to the last quarter. Now, if you look on sort of the top left, or generally the top here, you see all the topics that have to do with AI. It's ChatGPT, generative AI, conversational AI, and also this very big cluster of Industry 4.0, which is very closely related to that. So it's things like predictive maintenance, remote monitoring, industrial IoT, deep learning, machine vision, 3D printing. So it's very clear that AI is really on the top of the minds of executives. But you might want to say, well, that's all nice, right? But what can it actually do for you guys? And I made this kind of joke here and asked ChatGPT, well, how is my MF membrane machine doing today? And you can guess the answer is, I have no idea. I have no idea, right? It provides it a very, very nice way. It says, well, I cannot answer you that specific question, but I can give you some other context about generally how membrane machines are working. So that's an issue. The solution to that problem is really a marriage. It's a marriage between those public large models, those generative AI models, and industrial data, where you have the private, secure, sensitive corporate data, where you have that information available, and those two things, they have to get together. Now, let me give you a little bit of a sort of overview of what are some of the applications here of generative AI in the industrial context. So I put them in 4 categories here: sales, marketing, product development, supply chain optimization, and operations. And of course, that list is definitely not exhaustive. There are a lot of things that still are developing. But if you are thinking of experimenting with AI in your organization and you don't know where to start, then I really encourage you to take a picture of this or send me an email message later, and I will send that to you, because that's a really good starting point of where the low-hanging fruits are, in my opinion. So let me go through a couple of points here. Sales and marketing. I think that's the absolute lowest hanging fruit, content generation. So if you write blog articles, if you have product descriptions, if you try to make presentations, if you try to apply for grants, whatever it might be, right? ChatGPT is amazing in generating new content. Then you can sort of go further down the list and go into product recommendation, chatbots, virtual assistants, ad optimizations. On the other side is product development. And that's really the way you can think about AI. There is a creativity enabler. So you can do customization, personalization. You can enable collaboration. You can do design insights, rapid prototyping. You can really have ChatGPT or generative AI as kind of the sounding board that helps you design certain products a better way, especially for specific customer segments. The bottom part on the left here, supply chain optimization, that's really kind of a numbers crunching game, basically. It's the topics around inventory and logistics planning, demand forecasting, risk mitigation, and also supplier selection. So imagine a scenario where you have a system that's constantly checking the web and screening the web through What are all the new articles the supplier is publishing? What are sort of the local government regulation? What are the news around these topics? And all of this data informs the selection of your supplier. And it's not sort of a one-time activity. You can continuously monitor that. The fourth category here is operations. And that's kind of, I love that category. So it's about how can we make factories more efficient. So it's about production process efficiency, process and quality control, predictive maintenance, and also knowledge management. There's a lot of increased turnover in this industry, so it's very, very critical to make sure we have that knowledge captured and we are able to retrain people very effectively. And there are a lot of applications where ChatGPT is really a good way that teaches you content exactly the way you kind of learn. And if you haven't tried it, give it a try. It's really good. So now let me kind of jump a little bit further into that operations bucket here. And I picked here 4 applications for membrane filtration equipment. And there are many more, like always. The first one is production monitoring, which are kind of the topics of what you usually have in your more classical MES system. So it's uptime monitoring, classification of downtime, trend identification, CIP process validation. But the core differentiation here is that production monitoring usually looks at the past. You kind of record all the historical data and you see what has happened in the past. But the real value lies in predictions. And let me give you an example for this. If I'm kind of predicting the price of gold, and I'm telling you I can predict the price of gold of yesterday, how much money would you be willing to pay? Nothing, right? Because you can just look it up. But what happens if I can tell you I can predict the price with very good accuracy for 5 minutes from now? Well, maybe something, right? You can maybe do a little bit of trading. What happens if I can do it for tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, right? Suddenly you can completely, in theory, rearrange your financial assets and make all of these investments, and hopefully Markus is correct, and then you make a little bit of money out of this, right? So it's all about predictions, and predicting, the further you can predict, the more value you're able to generate. And that applies to all of the other topics on this list as well. There are things like health monitoring. Detect early signs of failure. Don't drive your car until it breaks on the side of the highway. Then you have to walk for 20 miles back into a garage shop. It would be much nicer if you get sort of an alarm and saying, hey, I'm about to break. I have to go to the garage shop before. And find issues before they actually cause the downtime, and enable traceability across your whole batch processing in the factories. The third one, predictive maintenance. It's very similar to health monitoring, I think, with the difference, then you want to really optimize the trade-off between the money and the time you invest in keeping maintenance costs down versus the trade-off that something breaks. So really be proactive and predictive about that helps to optimize that trade-off. The fourth category here is effective troubleshooting, where troubleshooting just make it faster, more efficient. You can think about it as AI as being kind of an assistant there. It helps you get to the root cause. And then once you find the root cause, you can use it, you can kind of fix it, and then it prevents future failures. So now just a one slide quick case study that we did. We looked at a dairy farm, they have 2 million liters of milk per day. They have a MF membrane filtration equipment, separating casein and wheat protein, 4 loops, and the business challenge they were facing, well, are there resources that can be saved, and how can we continuously validate the CIPs? So what we did there, the implementation is we basically connected to their S-Sieving PLCs. We're streaming all of the 200 plus data points, and then we run our AI algorithms on top of this. There are now over 1 billion data points or so. And then after we run those algorithms and everything is running live, then we visualize the results and aggregate the results and sort of put it back into the operator to inform the decisions. So the outcomes that we've seen is we validated over 1,000 cleaning cycles, gives a real confidence boost to QA and also the auditors that are coming. And we were able to identify where time, water, lay, and acid can be saved. So really boosting productivity and reducing waste. Then the third aspect that we're able to do, since we're sort of continuously monitoring each batch and compare it to the past history, we're able to identify where the batch duration can be optimized and at which time you can still extend the batch and in which cases you better go into a cleaning mode. Now, you might think about applying AI in your organization. And if you haven't thought about it, I encourage you to give it some thoughts. And I put this slide together here to give you kind of the three categories that are really worth thinking about. And sorry, that's a little bit messed up. But the first one is generate value for the business. And that's very, very important. You have to get to the sort of this return of investment. Now, it's an innovation. It's very cutting edge technology. And what that usually means, you cannot write the business plan before you actually start experimenting with it. You have to kind of have this initial starting point. And the good news is you can start small. You can just start small, it's low cost, and then sort of iterate fast. So you plant a few seeds, and then you see if some of the seeds are growing, you just water them. And by that approach, it sort of spreads within your organization and gets from one low-hanging fruit to the next low-hanging fruit. The second big category is acquiring knowledge. While ChatGPT is really easy to use, if you sort of want to make that marriage happening with your industrial data, then things become a little bit more complicated. And then it turns out to be like pretty complex, and also the technology is changing on a really daily basis. So my recommendation is here, bring the missing knowledge, work with consultancy, attend training sessions, have vendors compete for your business, and by that approach, you sort of get that knowledge on board and in-house. And the third category here is, and the reason I put it on the bottom, right, because it's really the foundation of everything that you're doing is security, privacy, and trust. Make really sure that everybody understands kind of the simple do's and don'ts. Like, don't put your social security number into ChatGPT. Don't put your bank accounts details in there, right? That sound trivial and obvious, but all of those things are happening. The second here is pick the right vendor. And that's basically OpenAI, Microsoft, IBM, AWS. They all have their own version of ChatGPT. And while they certainly are different when it comes to their capabilities, the main difference is really with their approach to privacy and security and how they handle your data. To give you an example, Microsoft will kind of never process any data that uses it that you put into ChatGPT to retrain the models. OpenAI is a little bit of a different story here. So really pick kind of the right vendor that matches for the individual use cases you're looking for. The last point here is don't stop experimenting or start experimenting if you haven't done so. And really do it across the whole organization. The cost of doing it is very, very low. As long as everybody understands kind of the boundaries of the sandbox and knows the tools to play with, let them experiment. Because you would be surprised of what they kind of can come up with if you give them like a little bit of a freedom and the right tools to experiment with. And now before we go into the Q&A session, I just want to leave you with I will call it my personal vision or dream or whatever, of the future of AI in the industrial context. When I finished my PhD, and I started working before I started working in the industry, I had kind of this pretty naive assumption that data is just there. That data is there in like really good quality, it's very well organized, and you spend 90% of your time just thinking about the real algorithm part of it. Now, when I started working in industry, what you suddenly realize, I guess no surprise to you, is that data is generally a complete mess. Right? So it looks something like that picture. And I see a lot of people are like agreeing with this, right? And that's probably a pretty accurate description of what's going on. It's probably simplified to it. So you have your MES systems, your AP systems, and all of the other boxes in there. And that's a real issue. So if you are thinking about trying to solve a problem where, for example, a customer might complain and you want to sort of backtrace or you want to troubleshoot an issue, what's the first step that you might want to do? Well, you might call up the ERP person and say, well, can you please give me that information? Then you write it down somewhere, you call up the next person to look into that system because you don't have access, you don't know how it works, and sort of you tangle your way from one day to the other, and days and weeks pass by, and if you're lucky, you find the information that you need, but more often than not, you just don't have that information. So maybe some of you know Asterix and Obelix. Maybe some of you can remember that episode. It's called The Place That Sends You Mad. And basically what Asterix and Obelix are tasked here to do is to get a form A38 or so. And they're basically going from one place to the other. And they're trying to get one signature, then you have to get a new form. It's pretty much the same, right? It's your ERP, MES, PLC stories, CMMS stories. And those are, I really call those silos of disconnected systems. And, my vision for all of this is to have a unified lens. To have a unified lens where you really just pick out your phone, and you ask a question. You ask the same question that I asked ChatGPT before. Well, how is my memory machine doing today? Are there any issues? And then instead of saying, well, I don't know, it will actually look up in all the databases and return back an answer to you and say, yes, I'm doing good today. I just finished a 19-hour batch. Everything was fine. I'm in cleaning. It takes a couple of minutes later, but nothing out of the ordinary. Do you want to be notified if something goes wrong? Well, that would be very powerful, right? So think about back to kind of the analogy I gave about the gardener and the tool. The gardener still remains the human being, which is interacting with the phone, right? Which is interacting with the AI system. You still ask the question, you still interpret the results. But what the AI is doing, the shuffle, it's sort of going behind the scenes and grabbing all the data for you. It's looking up in all the systems, it's combining it, it aggregates it, and it visualizes in a way that makes sense to you. So that's my final point. With that, I want to finish my presentation and go over for any questions. And please feel free to scan the QR code, connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll be more than happy to continue that conversation or send you a copy of the slide deck.
Hi, Markus. Thank you for the presentation. Do you have a idea of also creating like a membrane GPT? We talked earlier in previous sessions and panel about creating that foundational knowledge. And so for those that are still learning and don't have easy access to the appropriate leadership or the right trainers, is there, a ChatGPT style membrane GPT that they could go to learn that combines trainings from suppliers, OEMs, chemical suppliers, and then also what the machine has already been learning from the data that's been collected to help build and skills for employees?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's working on this, but we certainly experimented with it a little bit by really just starting to ingest documents, right? It comes back to that marriage. You don't want to put all of that information into the public sector, but you want to give it the option to scan documents and put that in sort of your private database structure. And once you have that set up, it kind of builds that knowledge base around those PDF documents. So you can put like 100 PDF documents or presentation or Word documents or emails or even like real data in there. And then you can basically have a membrane ChatGPT that teaches you about those things. You can ask it, please teach me about UF membrane filtration machines. And then it sort of starts teaching you. So yeah, it's definitely a really good idea, I think.
Quick question over here. In regards to your case study and the difficulty, I think, of that siloed data, what did you learn from communicating in that S7 environment? And when can we get, let's say, like a Babelfish version for PLC communication? that level is the stopping point for much of the transfer of that variable information into a coherent database that tells the stories that we want to feed into any AI algorithm. So what did you learn from how you got to communicate with your case study, and how can that apply to, let's say, North American environment where it's mostly Allen Bradley factory talk?
Yeah. So I know the American ecosystem is a little bit different when it comes to PLCs. I certainly know in Europe there are a lot of vendors out there that actually work on those edge devices, and we just partner up with them, and they take care of all the communication protocols and have the data handling and make sure that all of the data is only sent one way. So we are only on the receiving end, and we can have basically a read-only access. And to kind of solve that silo of disconnected system, I think it's unrealistic to try to put everything into one common database that you ever have in your factory. I think there are a lot of attempts out there, but I always see them failing. So I think you have to stay within kind of where you are. You just have to make sure you have like an overlying layer that is able to traverse all of those databases and find the data that you're looking for. So really much like a human that goes from one system to the other system, you can think of an AI agent that goes from one system to the other system and collects all of the data. And I think that's a much easier implementation than trying to consolidate everything into one database.
Follow-up.
Yeah.
I was really referring more to, you are looking at just one system. It's communication with that one system, and the variety from one system to the next is difficult. The coherency around the analysis, that still has to be figured out because they all are so unique. But I'm more worried about just getting that initial set of data to even apply the analysis.
Yeah. Happy to talk to you more about those. But certainly this problem is solved not by kind of the companies that look on the analytics side. Those are other companies out there. I'm happy to give you a list on that.
Thank you so much for the presentation. As this is so new to so many people, we just asked ChatGPT if a robot has ever built another robot. And it rather excitedly said, yes, and gave us a whole explanation. So my question is generative artificial intellect a thing? Or would it evolve into that?
I cannot really answer that question. I think undoubtedly there's still going to be more progress in that area. Things are going to become much more intelligent. Right? That's certainly an area of additional research and focus of AI, where it really goes into this very high level of intelligence that we see in science fiction. From what I have seen so far, I think we are really a far way from this, right? Because in the 1960s, this is where all of this started. And now we're kind of getting to like the first stepping stones where ChatGPT just learns the web and basically Googles it back to you. And it just frames it around it like it's nothing else, right? The way why it's so appealing that it's trained by actually humans, right? A lot of humans kind of give it the right prompting technique and say, well, if you ask this question, you have to respond like this, right? So there's still like a lot of human fine-tuning and massaging that happens within ChatGPT. And that's why it sounds so human-like, because there were so many humans involved in creating it.
Well, I had a question. Thanks for the presentation. Well, my question is more about the question that you asked ChatGPT.
Yeah.
How is my membrane system doing today? I mean, for this question to have a valid answer, you need to be able to define some parameters. And for me, the question is related to a membrane system. Who is the one that will be defining the parameters, and who's making sure that you have all the data trends and all the data points that you need to gather in order to answer such a question? Are you collaborating with some industry leaders in collecting these data points, making those trends to be able to make evaluations, or?
Yeah, certainly there needs to be a collaboration, right? Those AI systems, they are very good at answering general questions and trying to find a good answer to this, but you need to have the domain expertise somewhat. And I think in the early stages, that certainly has to come from process engineer, from really experts within the industry that define, okay, a healthy machine, look at those 3 parameters, or those 5, or those 10 parameters. And once that's defined, then it can do this. I think the further step is really, then once you combine that with Andy's question about all the documents and the training material, right, it will eventually understand how membrane machine is working. And it will generate that list for you, because it knows it's an UF, and it looks up in the description, okay, these are all the 10 parameters that need to be in that range. And then it can compare it back to the actual production data and get back to you with an answer, yes, that's based on the manual that is provided. This is all in spec.
Maybe just another question out of interest. I mean, we are talking now about AI, and we are probably in the initial development stages right now. How far do you think we are in order to make the AI that we will create a self-learning system that could be able to teach us about the membrane system, rather us feeding it information? How far along are we in that journey?
I think we're pretty close. I think we are really pretty close. Because especially AI is very advanced when it comes to processing text and data. Well, text in general, textual data. So in all of the manuals, presentation, whatever you throw in there, I think could be quite straightforward to create a system that is at least in a kind of maybe junior, senior process engineer level. It never reaches that experience level right now, but I think that's roughly where we are. We're probably at like a junior, senior process engineer knowledge level.
One final question here.
So my question is kind of approaching it as a plant manager. I was a plant manager and I saw this would be very interesting to my engineer, but my first 2 questions are, to you generally, is security. The beautiful thing about decentralization is you have to break into 6 different programs to grab all my data. You may break into my BOM to tell me what my ingredients are, but you can't break into my process, so you can't make what I make. So that's one. The second one is, if you were, so the security, and the other one is hallucinations. So ChatGPT is good at making up a lot of stuff. You can go on NPR, have a good time there. But there's a difference between GPT making hallucinations and just kind of making a weird story for an hour, and then telling you how to run your membrane completely wrong for an hour, and now I have 6 dead membranes. I understand most statistical models like PCRs or principal component analysis have a calibration and a test set. What I don't understand is, are there limits to artificial intelligence to hallucinate on my process? So those 2 things is, how do I prevent it from hallucinating? And how does the centralization kind of comes at a cost of security? How do I keep it safe now?
Yeah. So let me ask you answer the first question is about security. And I think there are two types of security that we need to talk about. The first one is, can the system actually change something on the plant? And that's a clear no. Like, all of the systems should be one way and read only. So you can never mess up with the plant. And I think that's already, making a big firewall there. The second point is really about keeping the data secure wherever it's centralized, so that not another competitor can get access to your recipe information and your secrets. And that's really, it's a very, very common problem that you have in all types of industries. If you use Microsoft Office, you're pretty much doing the same thing. You're putting everything of your data in a centralized system. So we just have to make sure that the system we're building is very secure, and has all of those boundaries in place, puts the data in their own databases, anonymized, has no single points of failure, and sort of all the security practices. Now, to answer your second question, yeah, ChatGPT, I don't know if you played around with ChatGPT 4. That's definitely much better and hallucination, and it's a big problem. There are a lot of ways to address it. You can ask it to self-critique it. That's a very, very good approach to basically, if it comes up with an answer, follow back the same thread and say, well, are you sure that this answer is correct based on the question that I asked? And more often than not, it will say, well, now that you're actually asking, I'm not so sure anymore. So there are a lot of techniques around those things. And I don't think AI will anytime soon run a whole plant or facility, right? It's a one-way street. The thing that it will push back is recommendation and insights, and we have to make sure that those are correct and true. But we still kind of need the gardener to really be sure, be the knowledgeable person, and say, well, 1 out of 100 times it's actually wrong, and it does suggest something that doesn't make any sense at all. And we kind of have to catch those cases. Over time, of course, those are going to be rarer and rarer.
Let's give another hand to Markus.